Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Chitheads. My guest today is John Greer. John has spent nearly 20 years inquiring deeply into sacred texts and teachings of the world's traditions, spurred by his own spiritual search. He is a dedicated practitioner of meditation and has taught insight meditation for over a decade. John Greer holds a PhD in education from Pennsylvania State University, and in 3 decades as a professor at the University of Memphis, published numerous articles, co-authored several books on education and special education, and was a recipient of the university's highest award for distinguished teaching. He also served for 2 years in Nepal with the Peace Corps and has traveled extensively on 6 continents. He lives with his wife in Memphis, Tennessee. So, hello, John. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, it's really nice to be here, Jacob. I love what you've put online. It's a wonderful resource for people, and I think apparently people are being drawn to it. So I'm honored to be invited.
Thank you, John. Well, it's an honor to have you, and I'm really looking forward to talking to you today mostly about the content of your book. The book is called Seeing, Knowing, Being, A Guide to Sacred Awakenings, and it really is a kind of very comprehensive overview of some of the main themes of the perennial philosophy, which we're going to talk about quite a bit today. So, but before we get into, what the perennial philosophy is, I'd love to hear a little bit about your story and kind of what led you to the perennial teachings.
Okay. I was born in Wilmington, Delaware. My parents were older than most of my friends' parents. They were very religious. I was raised in the Presbyterian Church. Sunday was always church.
Yeah.
And I loved it, and that became a very big part of my life. And but when I went to college, when I left home, when I had experiences, I started to have doubts about some of the ideas and the truths that I had been told about being a Christian and Presbyterian and so forth. And so travel was something that I always wanted to do. So the day after I graduated from high school, I crossed the country on a bus, stopping in different cities. And it happened that on one of those trips, there are no strangers on buses. Mm-hmm. And it was a student a little older than me from nationalist China, Taiwan now, and we talked about religion. Mm-hmm. And I found that I couldn't I couldn't really logically defend other than just saying, well, it's faith. And that really started me. And that summer, I in California, I worked with migrant children. And then I went to, it was a church program. Then I went to Mexico on my way home. And then the next year, I did another volunteer program, I think, with the Friends Society in Puerto Rico, and building a church and community center. And then I went to South America. And I did it alone. I traveled by bus down the Pan American Highway as far as the border of Bolivia. And one of the things that was most formative during that trip, the trip was wonderful. I loved the people. But I met the wives of missionaries in Quito, Ecuador, and they took me home. I was young. I looked younger. I didn't have a beard or anything. And so they said, why don't you come home? We'll give you a good meal. And they were wonderful. And so I stayed with them for several days. They had children that were a little bit younger than me. And then one of the husbands came in. They were with the Wycliffe Bible translators, and they broadcast from Quito. It's very high. It's, I think, 9,000 or 10,000 feet. And one of the husbands came in and said, our supply truck is going down to the jungle. Would you like to go? And of course, I took them up on that. And I went with that. I stayed in the mission hospital in Chalmera, right on the edge of the jungle. The manager of the hospital was wonderful to me also. And then he came in one day and said, "We've got room on the Cessna. Would you like to fly into one of the settlements?" And I did. And so I had 2 weeks in the settlements, two different settlements in the Ecuadorian Amazon, in a sense. And I watched the missionaries translate the Bible into Hebrew. They had to come up with a language. I mean, they had to put it into written form. Didn't exist that way. And anyway, I had these experiences, and then they gave me a letter of introduction. And 3 weeks later, when I got to Lima, Peru, the person that ran the halfway house for people donating to the mission effort, I was able to stay there, and so I saw their operation. I had immense admiration of their courage. They had children in the jungle. The jungle could be a very dangerous place, but they were intent on saved and lost, and they considered individuals. They figured that they had reached and converted, and others that they were trying, and their devotion is unquestioned. But I think that the natives, when they were converted, were kind of people without a country, people without a background, without they were rejected by their family. There were three folks from the jungle that the woman who ran the halfway house had me take to Lima because there was an American ship in port, and see if they could do it, because they had been accepted to the Navy. Mm. And I was able to do that and have a tour of the minesweeper. But they were people completely out of water, like fish out of water, and that was something that I could never reconcile, as wonderful as the people were to me. So that was fundamental. I came home, I finished my degree. I was accepted to Peace Corps, and I went to Nepal for 2 years, and they were 2 of the best years of my life. I loved it. I lived in a house made out of mud and stone with a thatched roof. I had a cook and his wife and 2-month-old baby who lived with me. Mm. They were muggers. They were from a sect or a tribe, really, in that area, and they were wonderful. Padma, the little boy's name was Padma, and he was like my own. And while I was there, there was no electricity, running water, anything like that. So I would sit under the Milky Way. And it was an amazing time for me, because I had 2 years to really think about life and where I fit in and everything. And the exclusivity of the religion I was raised in, and of so many religions, was totally unacceptable. I just, the whole idea of access to heaven based on a belief or anything like that seemed completely untenable. And so when I left Peace Corps, I went to Africa on the way home and traveled through South Yemen and Ethiopia and Tanzania and Kenya. Another great trip. I love the people I met. Again, when you travel by bus, there are no strangers, because if you're alone, people will warm up very quickly. Yeah. So anyway, those experiences were absolutely fundamental. But all I had to fill in the blanks at that point was existentialism. Mm-hmm. And it's not a real upbeat view of life.
To put it lightly.
I remember one of the statements that I read in Camus, and I think it was, the only question was whether or not to commit suicide.
Yes.
So that is really what I had for 2.5 decades. I got married. I got my degree at Penn State. I came to Memphis, to the University of Memphis. I met my wife there, and we have two wonderful children, and that's what I poured my life into for years. And then in 1994, I picked up a book by Alan Watts. I forget which one. I loved Alan Watts though,
Yeah.
because his metaphors, his way of relating things was wonderful.
Yeah.
And I picked up a book that I'd had in college, and it was completely different. It so deeply resonated with me that I never really did anything else after that. I read prolifically, and then I had a couple of years later, I still hadn't found a teacher. Meditation wasn't even that common in Memphis, and I was sitting in out in the backyard having a glass of wine, and I knew in an instant that life was one, that there was only wholeness, but it was out of context in a sense. I couldn't really make sense out of it, but I knew it was important. After that, I found my teacher, Matt Flickstein, who came to Memphis to do a weekend retreat, which I went to, and I ended up studying with him for 20 years. And he's a wonderful teacher. He lives in Virginia, and I poured myself into my practice and into reading. I read everything I could find. And then Matt said, one thing that I did, I guess because I was inspired by Alan Watts, is I collected metaphors.
Yes.
And I collected metaphors, but I didn't have a framework to put them in. So I listed them in different categories, and there's so many really wonderful metaphors that are available.
Yeah.
And Matt thought it was really a good idea, and he actually took it to Wisdom Publishers, and they didn't publish it. They had published his stuff, but they didn't see that it was ready for anything like that. And so I was, disappointed. I put it on the shelf, but I came back, got it published, and it was because of Matt's encouragement that I was able to do that. So anyway, now it's my life. I have had openings. I see life from a non-dual perspective, and it is liberating. There's a poignance to it too, because it's not the same old. It's not, you're not what you used to think you were, and so it's liberating. It's thrilling. It was anyway. That's where I am.
Yeah, that's beautiful, and I really appreciate hearing that really wonderful account of your life and the adventures that you've went through. And I love the role that travel has played in your own adventure. And I want to talk a little bit about that again in a moment, but I just want to touch on what you started mentioning regarding the metaphors and the images, because to me that was really, it's one of the things that I really like about your book, and it's obviously very intentional for a kind of pedagogical reason. And just for those that haven't read the book yet, who are listening, each one of John's chapters, he unpacks the theme, and then about 3/4 of the way into the chapter, there will be a portion that is devoted to images and metaphors. So I'm looking at one right now: mirror, flat Earth, and hole in the cheese, and then there's about a paragraph or two where he unpacks these metaphors as a way of illustrating the theme that he's exploring in the chapter. And it's really, It's a really beautiful, and like you say, there is something very Alan Watts about it. You feel like you've heard him sort of mention a couple of these or something like these in many of his lectures, which are my favorite. I'm sure you've listened to them. I had a period in my life where all I did was really listen to those Alan Watts lectures. They're incredibly inspiring. He's such an amazing orator as well. So can you talk a little bit about, the pedagogical role of image and metaphor, and why that kind of way of approaching these concepts or these themes is important on the spiritual path?
Okay. Really, it's hard to put into words some of the ideas in non-duality.
Yeah.
You are and you aren't. How do you really make sense out of saying to someone, well, you do exist, but you don't exist? And so it's metaphors. We can tell somebody what something is like, even if we can't tell them exactly what it is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so the idea of wholeness, and yet separation. How can there be an individual in a non-dual world where there are no parts? And I love the wave in the ocean.
Yeah.
The wave is separate. It has dimensions. It might have a white crest and so forth. And yet it's always the ocean.
Yeah.
And people can get they can get their mind around that. Where they can't get it around the indescribable thing that non-duality is. And I have used those metaphors so many times, and I love them. You mentioned hole in the cheese. I love that one.
Do you want to share what that one is?
Well, with whole, actually, that was from a play, I think, by Brecht, the German playwright, and it was something about hole in the cheese, and it's the idea of, like with Vipassana or things like that. You look at the different components of the self, and you see that thoughts aren't your own. Mm-hmm. You see all the different components of the self, and yet there is no self. They're just components. Mm-hmm. And the awareness, there's consciousness, but the awareness that's taking this in finds nothing. And with cheese, if you have a hole in the cheese and you eat the cheese slowly and you eliminate the cheese, the hole is nothing.
Yeah.
It's a concept of something that, in a sense, only exists relatively.
Yeah.
And that's my view of humanity. That's my view of myself. We exist. We do things. We have histories, and concepts play such a massive role in this. Like with time, if you have a memory of something you did last year, and then you're doing something right now, then it seems to argue very strongly for the existence of somebody that was there then and is still there now. Mm-hmm. And in life, we have memories and stories that illustrate that, in a sense, back as far as we can remember. Well, with the memory, there's memory, and there are the different episodes, but the entity that supposedly is seeing these things, participating in these things, it's not an entity. It's just life. Mm-hmm. And the things exist, the memories exist, but the person that has those memories is changing constantly. Mm-hmm. It's like a river. We are constantly changing. So it's that idea.
Yeah. Okay, John, so I had a question about, education because I know that you spent many years teaching in education. And so I was curious as I was reading your bio earlier, what your thoughts were kind of on the status or the position of education in this country from the perspective of your perennial position or the position of this book. Like, do you have any reflections on the state of education, given what I feel like you and I both see as the importance of this kind of these wisdom teachings?
It's a great question, and one that I don't have a I think a lot falls through the cracks.
Yeah.
I think there's so much emphasis on um, the the basic skills of getting a job,
Yeah.
and there's very little that develops the person and the wholeness of a person. Art, for example, music. I was very lucky when I was growing up in Delaware. Art was a a big part of it, and so was music. I was in the choir and the band, and those types of things are very important. A lot of the experiences that children have today are devoid of anything like that, unless it's something that points to the exclusivity of religion that I really am opposed to.
Yeah.
I think I wouldn't give it a very good grade.
Yeah.
I think most of the places that I'm familiar with, there's an absence of anything that really, I think of the Dead Poets Society. I don't know if you ever saw that movie,
Yeah, I did.
but
Yeah.
it was a beautiful movie. And when children are drawn into fascinating things that really make them think and kindles their imagination, I think that's the best future for our country and for the kids that are involved. And I don't see that today. It's very much occupationally oriented, and that's important for everybody to get a job. But there's an awful lot that the majority of children don't have access to.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I'm thinking also specifically of contemplative practice. If it is practiced at all, it would. I'm thinking specifically actually of my teacher who left academia because he felt like the most important thing was to kind of impart these practices where this kind of wisdom could spontaneously arise, but it's considered imparting a religion on someone to train them in meditative techniques. And it also kind of reminds me, what you're saying reminds me of a conversation I was having with Stephen Porges, the scientist who developed polyvagal theory, and he was remarking on how the universities are not places of safety, and so we expect kind of innovation and creativity to arise, but it can't when there's this kind of sense of competitiveness and fear that is really built into the very structure of the system.
I agree completely, and it's. I don't really know what the answer is, but it's so working with children and young people. We have four grandchildren of all boys, and they're 9 and younger, and they're right at my level.
Yeah.
And it's just watching them develop, watching them have questions and become perceptive about things in life and so forth. It's a joy to be around children, and that's a very important thing, and it's falling through the cracks a lot of times.
Mm.
Interestingly, one of the main reasons that I wrote the book was I started off writing it for our son and daughter.
Oh.
wanted them to know where I was that in that sense, and that's what I started writing it for. And because I didn't know how else to give it to them. They were younger at that time. They've both read the book now, and then it just goes from there. However, but it's so important, and education is so important, and it's missing a lot of the key ingredients. It's too bad in Nepal. I was there from '67 to '69, and
Wow.
a very, very, impoverished area. One of the things I always loved in Nepal was the namaste.
Hmm.
And when I would come out, of the house, a lot of times the kids would hang around just to watch me brush my teeth. They had never seen, that, and but bowing to them and saying namaste. You did that on the trails, and you're bowing to the light within them,
Hmm.
and they're bowing to the light within you, and that is such a beautiful thing that uh, the children get. There's still problems there in terms of religion, but I mean, my cook kind of hedged his bets. He respected all the different uh, parts of religion there. There was the Hinduism, and there was Buddhism, and there was the shaman in the
Yeah.
village and all that. So, but that's why I started writing the book, and it just went from one thing to another. And
Have you been happy with how your family received it, with how your son and daughter received it?
I have it's such an individual
Of
thing,
course,
and
yeah.
so I didn't want to proselytize myself,
Right, yeah.
and so it's just an offering,
Hmm.
and how it unfolds in their lives, that life will determine that.
Yeah.
But they both read the book, and they're wonderful, people, and they're raising their own children now, and it's just a miracle to watch.
Yeah, and hopefully generation after generation will get to read that book. That's wonderful. I mean, it's certainly a blessing for a family to have. So I want to now, we've been talking a little bit around kind of the perennial philosophy, and many people will be familiar with that term, but I wanted to just ask you, very, very straightforwardly, what is the perennial philosophy?
Okay, I was looking when I started really seriously getting into the book. I was looking for things that weren't proselytizing, that weren't coming from a particular angle, that were all inclusive. And William James, the varieties of religious experience,
Hmm.
um, Joseph Campbell, the hero with 1,000 faces. I love that
Yeah.
whole idea. And then Aldous Huxley and the Perennial Philosophy. And I loved all those books. The Perennial Philosophy kind of tied it all together with the idea that the thing that's missing, or the reason we don't see reality as we might, is that it's the way we look at it
Yeah.
and the way we see reality. And that way of seeing it is really conceptualization.
Hmm.
And when that really kind of lit my fire, and the idea of everything is becoming increasingly conceptualized, like the doctor. When I was a kid, the doctor came to the house with a bag, would give you
Hmm.
take your temperature and so forth. The specialization in medicine alone is incredible, and um, and that is logical as we pursue knowledge and understanding of the human body and so forth. And it's happened in everything. So we have this proliferation of concepts of parts,
Yeah.
We consistently divide life into more and more, smaller and smaller, more specific parts. And because of that, it's very hard to see wholeness. And so Aldous Huxley was focused on an idea that wasn't his originally, but one that is looking for wholeness in the midst of multiplicity.
Yeah.
And I loved it, and so it's really and Joseph Campbell does very much the same thing. He does it. The myths of humanity have the idea of the hero and of the division of an original, like in Polynesia. I don't know what the name of it is. The original being that's cut into countless pieces.
Yeah. You have that in Hinduism as well.
Yes, and the meaning or the idea is that the pieces they're playing hide and seek. There is life, but life can't see itself. From oneness, it's like being close to something. If you're too close, you can't focus.
Mm-hmm.
Alan Watts said, or it was Ken Wilber. I listened to the Ken Wilber interview that you had. He was asked why, why are things the way they are, and he said God doesn't like eating alone. And it's you have to have separation to see what life is. Alan Watts related it to the nerves in the body, that every human being or everything alive is reporting back to life, the whole, as to what it's like. It's that type thing. Well, with the perennial philosophy, where people are lost because of the multiplicity and we learn to see through concepts, and it's very hard to see without them. Mm-hmm. But that's the return, and meditation and seeing that thoughts aren't our own. When I saw that, that was a big thing, because thoughts are what precede actions and so forth. So he was talking about the reason why we don't see wholeness, and that there is wholeness, and that there is the possibility of returning to it. Yeah. And that is repeated in many ways around the world ultimately.
Mm. So, I understand that you do a particular, is it insight practice, insight meditation?
Yes.
So I'm curious, just from your own perspective, why, because you sort of zoom out and talk about the kind of perennial philosophy, and then when you, in the practice section, you're talking about many different practices. And so I'm curious why you felt inspired to do that rather than teach specifically insight meditation or just speak about one practice.
When I started, there weren't even that many books on this subject.
Right.
And when I met Matt, he was trained by Bhante Gunaratana. It is in Theravadan Buddhism, and it just related to me. He wasn't, it was completely open. It was there wasn't any choice of or attempt to proselytize or to get people to believe that way.
Yeah.
He didn't even have the trappings of it. He was just, he didn't wear a robe or do anything like that. And I was drawn to that. And I see it, and he has since moved to non-duality. And Bhante, he has great stories of working with Bhante. He helped Bhante start the Bhavana Society in West Virginia. And Bhante was from Sri Lanka. He's a monk in Sri Lanka, and he's considered a living saint by the Sri Lankans. But let's see, Emily, the thing about Vipassana was that it didn't necessitate a belief system.
Right.
And so it was a tool.
Mm-hmm.
And it was clean that way. It was a tool that helped you be present, helped you see things differently when the mind begins to calm down. It helps you see how crazy the mind is. I mean, the mind is the Buddhist metaphor for that is monkeys swinging from tree to tree, I believe.
Yeah.
And it's funny, in Nepal, when I would hike to different villages, they did that. There were monkeys up in the trees, and you could hear them coming. And then they'd throw stuff down, when they'd pass us and keep going. So I like the fact that it was a tool. And there are many tools, and I'm not saying it was the best tool but it was a very good tool, and it was the tool that the Buddha recommended, and that was important too.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about now some of the specific chapters of the book, and each chapter is given a very simple title, and it's sort of many of the concepts or ideas that you encounter along the way in different traditions. And the book itself is split between two parts. The first one is the exile, and the second part is the return. So can you talk a little bit about what you mean by the exile and the return?
Yes. The exile is when we are taught, I mean, from the time we're born, our parents give us a name. They start pointing things out of what this is and what that is, and this is mom and this is dad and so forth. And that process goes on through elementary school and high school and college as far as you go, and life is a teacher, and everything that happens in you. But everything is based on you being separate. When the child is born, they aren't separate. They don't have any concepts. They don't have any, and watching a baby explore its environment is a fascinating thing and a joyous thing. But society teaches an individual, it teaches that human being to be an individual. And we carry the identification of every sort. We have a license and a passport and all the different things that identify who we are. And that's the exile. And the more you feel your separateness, and the more you feel you have your story. Everybody has their story. And if you go to a party, the first thing people ask is, well, where do you work? And it's that story. And so seeing the connection, seeing the oneness is almost impossible.
Yeah. And
with that comes pain. And we feel lost. We feel at odds with life. We don't know where we fit in. A metaphor that I love is we feel like a page torn out of a novel. Mm-hmm. How do you make sense out of a single page? And so at that point, there is the good thing about pain and suffering is that it's an impetus to look, to search for a way out, to search for an answer. And that's where the return comes in. And if a person finds a way to undo, to unlearn some of those things. They're necessary to get along in society, but they aren't exactly they aren't what we are.
Mm-hmm.
They're the story. And to strip those things away, it's a little bit like antique furniture. We've got, by the time we get to 20 or 25 or 30, we've got several coats of thick paint that hide us from what's real.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's like stripping that paint off. You gradually start to realize that there is something much greater that you really are. And insights give us glimpses of that. And that's what the return is. And it's difficult and it's scary because, because you start to see that the self you think you are is not real. And that's terrifying. And actually, for a lot of people who get involved with this, that's too much.
Yeah.
And they pull away and they don't continue.
Yeah.
But if that happens, if that barrier is penetrated, then one starts to see the light and the connection with the rest of life.
Yeah.
And one of the most beautiful things with this, Jacob, is the wonder that comes. The wonder for I've always loved nature.
Mm-hmm.
And we spend quite a bit of time at the beach, and taking a chair down to the edge of the water at night, even in the winter, there's something just wonderful about that. Or getting up early in the morning to see a sunrise, or watching pelicans fly in formation, and all of those things, and little things, just the leaves on the forest floor, and the design, the desiccated leaves as they break up, and the twigs. And I love photography, and so I take pictures of little things, big things, and then write haiku that kind of relate that to non-duality.
Yeah.
And I enjoy that a great deal. But the wonder of just watching a child, a baby, it's miraculous.
Yeah, I love that you're mentioning wonder, because I've always preferred, I feel like sometimes when we talk about this process of awakening, often the beginning of the process in certain accounts is sort of dukkha or suffering, and I've always preferred kind of to think that wonder is sort of the starting place, because if suffering is the starting place, there's something kind of escapist, it seems like, about the nature of the process, whereas wonder provokes a kind of, or incites a sort of desire to become one with that which one feels wonder about.
Yes. In fact, there are times when you are no longer there, where you're so stunned by the beauty that there's no sense of self. Of course, that happens to a lot of things, like the zone in sports is a great metaphor.
Yeah.
Because if you don't think, if you're not reflecting on what you're doing, you do a lot better.
Yeah.
I love I play at blues harp, and just a harmonica, and I'm not good. I don't play enough and everything, but I have friends that when they get going, they're not there anymore.
Yeah.
It's just life.
Yeah.
Life just playing. It's a wonderful thing, and it happens in sports all the time. It happens in music. It happens in anything, gardening, art, whatever, where the mind just steps aside and lets the flow of life do its thing. And that is a joy. And the answers, getting to the wonder point, there are no answers. We can't figure it out. There's no way you can explain exactly what this is and exactly what that is, but it's the unknowing magnificence of it all.
Yeah.
Just the breathtaking um, experience of being alive.
Yeah. I like this, uh, what you're talking about, because it reminds me of, a lot of times as academics look for the authorship, when we go back into certain, ancient traditions, I know better the Vedic one because it's sort of mostly what I study, but there's so much, question of authorship, and often you see the same name like Vyas or Patanjali, writing so many different things, and the confusion around whether or not this is the same person. And it seems it's a particularly, contemporary concern to
Hmm.
like staple a specific authorship on something, whereas it seems like, if you just look to the wisdom of those traditions, I mean, they're essentially saying that there is no authorship in that kind of, purely individuated sense, like you're saying, and that really seems to be kind of, one of these wisdom insights is that these texts, these spiritual, teachings are things that kind of emerge like waves on that ocean of consciousness, rather than, being sort of easily sourced in a particular socio-historical context by an individual, in a certain setting, even though that might be interesting from a certain historical perspective, but not
Yeah.
necessarily from this more perennial one.
I think one of the most fundamental things is everything does everything. We're not the doer. And that's liberating in many ways when we're so apt to judge ourselves for something that happened or whatever. And we're even more apt to take credit for this or take credit for that. But I had an experience that a lot of people have had where I'd write something and read it the next day and be
Yeah.
amazed that what was on the paper, and it's when that is seen, there really is a freedom from judgment. I still, we all still judge ourselves and what went well and what didn't and so forth, but um, I guess it really boils down to wonder for me. It just the magic of life, the beauty, the extraordinary beauty of life, the pain, the suffering, the all the terrible things in life. It's necessary for duality. I guess we don't know hot without cold, and we don't know good without bad, and it's necessary for the way things are set up. But the wonder and beauty and love of life is really breathtaking.
Hmm. I liked what you were saying about, you're describing kind of as we're children, and we are encouraged socially into this process of individuation. And it's not that it's bad, right? Because if you didn't have that individuating process, you would be kind of a completely codependent creature on your parents your
Right.
whole life. So there is this sense in which it's a necessary kind of
Hmm.
external into the world kind of process, but then we get lost there, right? I mean, that's really where our culture has sort of forgotten this process, that there is a kind of, like you say in the book, there's a return. Like we get the exile, but then we're lost in that exile. We don't even we forget that the true independence really is the independence that has remerged with the absolute after that individuating process is complete.
Yes, that's it's true. You really do need all those. I mean, we need a license. We have to, all all those things that we need, and that's tricky because how I mean, it seems so counterintuitive to people when they hear for the first time or read for the first time that they don't exist, at least the way they think they do.
Yeah.
But both things are necessary, and it goes back to you are, but you aren't, or you are, but not what you think you are. That type thing. It's hard. It's so paradoxical. Um, but it's wonderful too when you do have that self concept and things aren't going well. If there's realization that you aren't what you think you are, it's a little bit like playing Monopoly.
Yeah.
You know, you're losing, everybody's beating you, you've done the wrong things and everything, and then suddenly you think it's a game. And there's the relief. I mean, it's a minor example, but when you realize that it's just life, there is the willingness to let it roll,
Mm-hmm.
to get out of your own way,
Mm-hmm.
to um, to open up to the possibility of pain or suffering, but to be life. It's a wonderful thing. So, but we need it. We need that training.
So I want to ask you a question that I ask a lot, sort of in these types of discussions, which because most of the time those who appeal to this kind of wisdom also happen to be people who fall on the left side of things
Mhm.
politically. And there is a kind of seeming paradox, I think, sometimes between the the wisdom teaching of the no self, right, or that we are not what we think we are, and the kind of political objectives of recognizing certain minorities, for example. So I'm a member of the LGBT community. There's a certain kind of systems of oppression that are in place. Obviously, we have issues with African Americans as well, and other ethnic minorities in this country that where there's a particular need for certain kinds of recognition of individuation in order to be equal. So how do we from the what is the wisdom perspective, the perennial wisdom perspective, offer to that kind of understanding without just saying, oh well, your suffering as a minority is just a part of your own kind of individual illusion.
Well, I think the main idea is there is only one. You know, we're all one. So the distinctions are conceptual. That's the way we see through that it's like the map and the territory.
Yeah.
The map, shows different turns and parts and so forth, but the territory is one. And I think as we understand, I think with this approach to life, I think there's the self is put into context, and the actions of individuals are seen as the actions of life, and we're not the doer, and the choices that we make are based on everything that's happened to us. And seeing that, the boundaries come down, the walls come down. uh, I, I guess in Joseph Campbell, the wall around Eden was conceptual,
Yeah.
and it's the words, the terms that identify us, that categorize us. But when those walls are taken down, there is life whole, and it's sad, like with religious differences, the things that have happened. Um, because my experience in Islamic countries in Ethiopia, and I wasn't in South Yemen long, but um, people are people, and I think that they were open and friendly and wonderful. They're very hospitable, and the differences are minor compared to the whole,
Mm-hmm.
compared to what we truly are. So I see us as actors in a play, and we read different roles, but we didn't write the script.
Mm-hmm.
None of us. did. The people that we disagree with, the people that we think are doing harm and so forth, they didn't write the script either. Life is the doer. Life lets the the story unfold. When we see that, we take everything with a grain of salt. And recent times have been very frustrating. The news is difficult to read or to listen to, but it helps to know that in the end, it's all story, and it's not what's real. Um, so I don't know if that really answers your question. There isn't
There isn't an easy answer, I know, the for sure, because, but I guess my follow-up question would be then, if we're not the doer, then what do we do about, social justice or equality, or if I'm not the doer, how does that not just completely debilitate me in the face of injustice?
I think we follow the conditioning. We follow the mandate of what we are, and we're trained by our parents. We are influenced by our society. That's the story of life. We do our best. But I think that understanding it in terms of not being the doer frees us to really follow our own heart. I think when we understand wholeness and what we truly are, then the differences that conditioning tells us exist don't exist that way. So it's certainly possible that somebody who has a superficial understanding of this teaching could use it to, do anything they want. Well, I'm not the doer and everything, and that is, I'm sure, happens. But it's liberating when you see it at a deeper level. And when you see it at a deeper level, then I think the oneness with each other uh, is the main thing. We see that there are different choices that we all make, but we're one, and there's no easy answer to it.
Well, you say something in the non-doing chapter. You quote Watts, and I really liked this because I feel like it speaks to this question. You say Watts introduced this Taoist fundamental to the West, speaking about non-doing, 40 years ago, and stressed the distinction between non-doing and inertia, laziness, laissez-faire, or mere passivity, right? So the idea being that non-doing is not just not doing anything.
Right.
And the key, this is continuing what you were writing, the key lies in the construct of the doer. In non-doing, no doer is conceived of except life itself, so this issue is moot. In inertia, laziness, and laissez-faire, the self considered responsible for the necessary actions fails to act. So the idea that, if by inhabiting a spirit of non-doing, it's not that nothing's happening, it's just that you're getting out of the way of a process that perhaps would move more efficiently towards healing the situation of life, right, or the political situation, rather than if you were trying to meddle with it. So it's about really getting out of your own way, in a sense.
Yes, it is. Again, like the zone in sports. If you think about what you're doing, you're caught. You don't make the shot or whatever. I think in life, I think knowing the wholeness, knowing the oneness that underlies everything, the connection between each other is strengthened, where you see that uh, we're wearing different costumes, we act in different ways, we believe different things, but that is the play, that is the acting, but the actors are life, and that's the oneness. So I think I understand completely what you're saying, and I think that something like this could easily be a justification for uh, you know behaviors that are very inappropriate. But I think the wholeness underlying everything else um, connects us in ways that we didn't have before.
Right.
The way it has been traditionally, there are tremendous differences and tremendous problems. And I think if they really knew that there is oneness underneath and that there was no division, that we are all connected in profound ways, then the conflicts that we see every day would be minimized.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, I guess, Jacob, the story is the education.
Yeah.
It's the design of life to have differences, to have crises, to have conflicts, as difficult and painful as they are. We know the horrible things that have happened in history. We also know the wonderful things that have happened. But it's a little bit like watching a movie uh, and then walking out. We're lost in the movie. We cry, we laugh, we are completely uh, taken by the story. And then it ends, and we walk out to the parking lot and realize what's real. And we see terrible things. We see cruelty and unfairness and so forth. But I think we can see the whole without neglecting our responsibilities as an individual.
Right.
It's both. We are and we aren't.
Yeah.
And as paradoxical as that is, I have found it easier to see it both ways, and magical, and that's the wonder of it all.
Yeah. So you mentioned in your book that Meister Eckhart says that man's last and highest parting is when, for God's sake, he takes leave of God. And so I wanted to ask you about God from the perennial perspective, because I like that you mention that both atheism and a kind of dogmatic idea of God both sort of go too far in opposite directions. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, they're concepts.
Yeah.
And again, concepts divide. If you have an atheist, you have a believer. You
Right.
have, it's those are concepts, and um, I see what Eckhart was saying. He's really good. Some of his sermons,
Yeah.
way back are very good, and it's a wonder he wasn't crucified for it.
Yeah. Right.
There weren't many that made it through the West with ideas like that. But uh, I think there's a difference that is important. I think the exoteric and the esoteric are relevant here. The exoteric things are very concrete, and that's actually where most people are.
Yeah.
And they have right, and everything is dualistic. Everything is this way or that way, and there's not much in between. And the esoteric uh, is the non-dual. Everybody doesn't have the luxury of going the esoteric way. It takes time. retreats, the tremendous effort. I read so many books and spent so much time on it, and most people don't have that much time.
Yeah.
They're so busy. I see that's very important, how we believe and what we believe, and I think there is a place for that, and it's the way life unfolds. It's the way the story unfolds, and so there's no. Uh, what we do is part of the story. The terrible things that happen, um, it would be it would be ironic if something as peaceful as non-duality and as wholesome as non-duality liberated a person in a sense to do wrong. That's certainly not a desired outcome, but I see it as the design of life. And we need what we need at different stages in life. And I don't know if I've answered your question or
No, you
not.
have, yeah. Well, and so I guess this is sort of my last question that I have. This has been a really interesting conversation, and I think this topic is so important for people to hear, and especially the ways of, and one thing I really appreciate about your book is the way in which it encourages those that may have, like you and I, been raised in Christian traditions, which tends to, at least in most incarnations of Christianity today, is a very rigid kind of dogmatic idea, and there really is an esoteric component to the Christian tradition that is very comforting for those of us who were raised with that kind of rigidity. But one of the things that you mention towards the end of your book, which I really appreciated, is you bring up the question of verifiability. If knowledge is based on, this is your quote, if knowledge is based on others' testimony alone, if knowledge based on others' testimony alone cannot be proved or disproved, right? This is sort of the question from those who would, be on the side of science or scientific verifiability. How can we distinguish it from dogma, or the sort of unsubstantiated claims we sometimes encounter in the popular spiritual literature? So I guess it's a question of, and you hear this a lot, it's like if the gurus or the sages are all talking about this incredible experience, I've never had it, it seems very inaccessible to me, how am I to know, or how, if I can't access that verifiability that I can access through at least theoretically being able to execute the same kind of scientific practices to get there, then where am I what do I stand on, basically?
Well, that's I think most traditions have some form of verifying a person's position, understanding them, whether it's all the different religious traditions typically have something that is used. It's not foolproof, and there are a lot of people that make claims that aren't real. I don't know if I think most of the people that follow a tradition are tested in some way.
Yeah.
Things are looked at by others who have done that path, but it's not foolproof. And in every aspect of life, the same thing happens. It's the things that a person does and the things that a person says, they can be profoundly different. And I guess it's just the system that we're in, the life that we're in. It's part of the story. It's not flawless, but it's worth the effort to get into it if a person has the time. But there's no foolproof system. There in all the traditions, there are typically ways of testing the understanding of an individual. but it's not foolproof, and I know exactly what you're talking about, and um, I wished I had an answer for that, but I really don't.
Well, it seems like the part of the answer is what I do hear you saying in terms of an answer is that there's work to be done, and there are methods you can employ rather than just taking someone's word for it. Even like when you were talking about your own practice, your insight meditation practice, it didn't require a belief system. It just required you to actually do the experiment of practice, and to find that truth, in yourself for yourself.
I think actually people that don't practice at all have openings.
Yeah.
It's kind of on the schedule of life,
Right.
and it's
It's
not.
grace.
There's not. That's right. There's not. It's not a credit thing.
Yeah.
People can work all
Too
their
bad.
lives. People can work all their lives and not have anything.
Yeah.
It's just it. Uh, we're reading a script that we didn't write. I
Hmm.
see it that way, and but the wonder and the love that are associated with it are hard to. Um, I mean, they're wonderful, and I think everything that you're doing with the program is wonderful. I think making access to it, there is certainly more discussion worldwide. I think that the internet has played a big role in this.
Hmm.
The access to the literature of the different traditions wasn't very common. Most of what William James has in his book are still limited to Christianity and Judaism,
Yeah.
and it's the richness, uh, the cross fertilization. A lot of the metaphors that I use in the book are from other traditions, and Rumi. I love Rumi,
Hmm.
and there's so many rich things, and things fall through the cracks, and life has always been that way. And wish we could perfect it, but again, it's a design that we really didn't produce.
Yeah. So, are there any final thoughts, John, that you'd like to share based on what we're talking about? Any kind of blind spots you think that we should have touched on?
I really can't think of anything. You really have a very broad offering. It's
Thank
it's
you.
uh, quite remarkable. The teacher, I mean the courses that are offered, and the podcasts, and the Tarka articles, and I mean it's remarkable. To think you've done this in the amount of time that you've put into it. Is really kudos to you. It's wonderful what you've done, and I am privileged to play this small part in it, and I really do appreciate the invite. It's always nice to talk about this and to
Yeah.
share it, because there's still a lot of people that have no awareness of it, and
Yes. Yeah.
so it's nice to do that.
Absolutely. Well, I feel like your book is a really excellent, probably more so than any other introduction to perennial philosophy, because you bring in so many of the kind of luminaries. You talk about Alan Watts. You discuss, Sharon Salzberg is in there. Jung. I mean, you really do kind of introduce almost, you could say, a canon of figures that we might say are part of this sort of this tradition of perennial teachings that, of course, is the tradition of traditions in a certain sense. And so it's a great book, and I plan on giving it as a gift to people who I think are right at that that juncture where they're ready to kind of explore these teachings. And so thank you for writing it, and thank you also for your affirmative words about embodied philosophy. I appreciate that. So, John, are there any ways for people to get a hold of you? I know you have a website, which is, if I'm correct, it's the title of your book, yes?
Yes.
seeingknowingbeing.com. Is that right?
Yes. I must say that I haven't been keeping that up as actively as I should. Maybe after this now I'll run back and put some new things on it. I've always been open to interacting with people. I like to do that. I have a small group that is interested in non-duality here in Memphis. But it's a joy to share
Yeah.
something that is so transformative, and I'm always learning from the process and seeing new insights and new ways to explain it. And your efforts are remarkable, and so I'm really glad that I see that. I also have a Twitter account, and I make small, tweets on that. I've done that ever since the book came out.
Excellent.
But
So, so
yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
so I would encourage everyone out there listening who is in the Memphis area to try to get in touch with John. Maybe you can join that non-duality group, which sounds amazing, um, and uh, and also do get his book, Seeing Knowing Being: A Guide to Sacred Awakenings. And yes, John, it's been a pleasure chatting with you today, and thank you so much for sharing your time.
The pleasure is mutual, Jacob. It's really nice to meet you, and I will follow your efforts with great interest.